For 10 years, Julian was the sun, and I was a planet caught in his orbit. Close enough to feel the warmth, but always, always at a distance. I never thought he even saw me, not really. Not the way I saw him. He was my best friend, a title that felt both like a gift and a cage. Then a cold lake and a single moment of silence changed everything. It's funny how you can think you're living when you've really just been holding your breath the whole time. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. The same coffee shop every morning, the same worn path through the park, the same stack of books by my bed. I was a researcher, a professional observer of forgotten histories, and I'd applied the same detached methodology to my own existence. I cataloged the world from behind a pane of glass. It was safe. It was predictable. It was lonely. Julian was the antithesis of my structured world. He didn't walk into a room. He occupied it, filled it with a kind of crackling energy that drew all eyes. He was a contractor, a man who built things with his hands, who wrestled order from chaos with sweat and tangible effort. His laughter was loud and unapologetic. His confidence was a fortress I could only ever admire from the outside. We've been friends since college, an unlikely pairing from the start. The quiet, bookish boy and the charismatic athlete. He defended me from a bully in the library once, a simple act of casual kindness that had, for me, felt like a seismic event. After that, I just sort of stuck. I became the quiet confidant, the steady presence in the whirlwind of his life. The listener, the observer, and I observed everything. I knew the way a small muscle in his jaw would tick when he was stressed. I knew the exact shade of gold his eyes turned in the late afternoon sun. I knew the map of calluses on his palms from 1,000 handshakes that were friendly and firm and never, ever lingered long enough on mine. The distance between us was a chasm I'd meticulously papered over with the label of friendship. He had girlfriends, a string of them, all bright and beautiful and everything I was not. I would listen to his stories about them, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs, and I would offer sage, detached advice. I became an expert at hiding, at pretending the ache in my chest was just a shadow, a trick of the light. He was the one solid thing in my life, and the one thing that made it feel so unbearably fragile. A friendship built on a foundation of my own silence. A decade of unspoken words. Then came the invitation. Leo, we need to get out of the city. My uncle's old cabin, just for the weekend. No excuses, my world. My carefully constructed routine shuddered. An excuse was my native language. I had a dozen of them ready on my tongue. A research deadline, a pending article, a sudden, debilitating interest in reorganizing my sock drawer. But the way he said it, the exhaustion I could hear under the command, disarmed me. He sounded frayed, and Julian never sounded frayed. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign and reckless. Yeah, okay. Let's go. The disruption began the moment I climbed into his truck. My small, curated world of books and quiet corners was replaced by the scent of sawdust and coffee in him. It was overwhelming. His presence was so physical, so solid. He took up space in a way I never could. My knee brushed against his as he shifted gears, and the contact was like a low-voltage shock, a humming awareness that spread through my entire body. I pulled my leg away as if burned. The forced proximity of the truck was just a prelude. The cabin was small, intimately so. One main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bunks built into the wall. The air was thick with the smell of pine and cold stone and disuse. It was a space designed for 2 people to exist in each other's pockets. My carefully maintained distance was about to be obliterated. It's not much, Julian said, dropping his duffel bag with a heavy thud. But the air is clean and the lake is cold. Figure it would do us some good. He looked around the small space, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the usual confidence. I saw a weariness in the lines around his eyes, a slight slump in his broad shoulders that wasn't usually there. He was running from something, I realized, and he brought me with him. The first day was a performance of normalcy. We unpacked. He chopped wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe, a steady heartbeat in the quiet woods. I watched him from the porch, pretending to read. The sleeves of his flannel were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Sweat dampened the hair at his temples. I noticed a thin, white scar running along his left bicep, a detail I'd never seen before, a small piece of his history I didn't know. My observation felt clinical, a desperate attempt to keep him as a subject, a thing to be studied rather than felt. But it was failing. The glass was cracking. Every movement he made, every casual word he spoke, was a small stone thrown against it. That evening, he built a fire. He moved with an easy, practiced competence that I envied. I, on the other hand, felt clumsy and out of place, a city creature transplanted into the wild. I tried to help with dinner and nearly dropped a can of beans on my foot. He just laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that warmed the small cabin. "Easy there, Professor. Don't hurt yourself. I'll handle this." He took the can from my hands, and for a half-second, his fingers brushed against mine. Heat. A sudden, sharp jolt. I flinched, pulling my hand back. Shock. Panic. A ridiculous overreaction to a meaningless touch. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. He glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Confusion? "You okay?" "Fine," I mumbled, turning away to busy myself with plates that were already clean. "Just cold." It was a lie. The fire was roaring, and the cabin was sweltering. But the lie was easier than the truth. The truth was that his touch had short-circuited my entire nervous system. The truth was that 10 years of carefully constructed walls had just been breached by the slightest, most accidental contact. The rest of the evening was tense. I retreated into myself, offering monosyllabic answers. The silence between us grew, no longer comfortable, but heavy with unspoken things. He seemed to feel it too. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight, that little muscle ticking away. I felt like a fool. I had made it weird. I had taken a simple, friendly gesture and loaded it with a decade of my own hidden longing. He probably thought I was insane. Later, as we settled into our separate bunks, the darkness felt absolute. I could hear him breathing across the small room, a slow, steady rhythm. It should have been comforting. Instead, it was a torment. Each inhale, each exhale was a reminder of his proximity, of the impossible gulf that separated our two narrow beds. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a carousel of anxieties. I'd ruined it. This trip was a mistake. He knew. He must have always known, and he was just being kind, just tolerating me. The next morning, the tension was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. Julian suggested we take the canoe out on the lake. "It'll clear our heads," he said, his gaze fixed on the water, not on me. I hated the water. I couldn't swim well, a fact I'd always been vaguely ashamed of. But saying no felt like admitting defeat, like retreating further into my shell. So I agreed. The lake was vast and shockingly cold. The sky was a sharp, unforgiving blue. The water was the color of slate, deep and mysterious. Julian paddled with powerful, even strokes, propelling us away from shore. I sat in the front, my hands gripping the sides of the canoe, my knuckles white. "Relax, Leo," he said from behind me. His voice was calm, but I could hear the forced casualness in it. "It's beautiful out here," I tried. I really did. I tried to focus on the pine-scented air, on the cry of a distant loon. But all I could feel was the unnerving instability of the canoe, the immense cold weight of the water beneath us. My anxiety was a physical thing, a knot of ice in my stomach. I shifted my weight, trying to get more comfortable. It was a small movement. Insignificant, but it was enough. The canoe rocked violently. My heart leaped into my throat. I overcorrected, leaning too far the other way. The world tilted. One moment, I was looking at the brilliant blue sky. The next, I was submerged in shocking, breathless cold. Panic was immediate and absolute. The icy water stole the air from my lungs. My clothes were suddenly impossibly heavy, pulling me down. I flailed, my arms and legs churning uselessly. My mind was a blank slate of pure terror. I saw a flash of the overturned red canoe, then Julian's head breaking the surface a few feet away. "Lao." His voice was distorted by the water, a sound of raw alarm. I tried to answer, but I only swallowed a mouthful of icy, metallic-tasting water. My lungs burned. The light from the surface began to recede, shimmering and distant. My movements became sluggish. The panic was fading, replaced by a strange, heavy calm. So, this is it, I thought with a bizarre sense of detachment. This is how it ends. Then strong hands are on me, grabbing my shirt, my arm, hauling me upwards. I broke the surface, gasping, choking, water streaming from my nose and mouth. Julian's arm was a band of steel around my chest. "I've got you. Stop fighting me, Leo. I've got you," he was yelling, his face inches from mine, his eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in him before. He towed me to the shore, his breaths coming in harsh, ragged gasps. The swim felt like an eternity. By the time my feet scraped against the rocky bottom, I was barely conscious. He half-dragged, half-carried me onto the muddy bank. I collapsed onto the ground, coughing up water, my body racked with violent shivers. Every muscle ached. The world was a blurry, spinning mess. Julian knelt over me. "Now, Leo, look at me. Are you breathing?" I tried to nod, but all I could do was cough a raw, hacking sound that tore at my throat. My vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. I wasn't getting enough air. "Damn it," he swore, a sound of pure, undiluted terror. He tilted my head back, pinched my nose, and then his mouth was on mine. It wasn't a kiss. It was something far more primal, more desperate. It was the shock of his breath forcing its way into my lungs. A warmth in the overwhelming cold. A connection so profound it bypassed thought entirely. My mind, which was always worrying, always analyzing, went completely silent. There was only the feeling of his mouth on mine, the pressure of his hands on my chest, the sheer, undeniable fact of him keeping me alive. He pulled back, took a breath, and did it again. Air, life, his essence flooding into me. A wave of something warm and electric washed through me, chasing away the cold, chasing away the darkness. My lungs convulsed, and I took a deep, shuddering breath on my own. Then another. I coughed again, harder this time, and rolled onto my side, spitting up more water. The air felt sharp and clean and miraculous in my lungs. I was shivering uncontrollably, but I was breathing. I was alive. Julian sat back on his heels, his hands hovering over me, as if he were afraid to touch me again. He was breathing as hard as I was. His face was pale, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. And his eyes, the fortress was gone. The confidence was stripped away. All I could see was a raw, terrifying vulnerability. He looked utterly shattered. In that moment, everything shifted. He, the strong one, the savior, looked like he was the one who needed saving. I, the weak one, the victim, felt a sudden, fierce urge to comfort him. The power dynamic, the one that had defined our friendship for a decade, had been completely inverted. "Julian," I whispered, my voice a raw croak. He just shook his head, scrubbing a hand over his face. "God, Leo, I thought I lost you." The words hung in the air between us, more intimate than any touch. He wasn't looking at me, but at the dark, placid water of the lake, as if it were a mortal enemy. I was no longer just an observer. I was the reason for the terror in his eyes, and that knowledge changed everything. He stripped off his wet shirt and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was a useless gesture against the profound cold, but the intent was everything. He helped me to my feet, his arms securely around my waist, supporting most of my weight. We stumbled back toward the cabin, a slow, shivering procession. The world was silent except for the squelch of our wet boots and the ragged sound of our breathing. Inside, he worked with a frantic, focused energy. He started a fire, his hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to light the match. He stripped my wet clothes off with an impersonal efficiency, as if I were a patient and he a doctor. He wrapped me in every dry blanket he could find and sat me in front of the roaring flames. I just sat there, numb and shivering, watching him. He was a whirlwind of panicked activity, never stopping, never looking at me directly. He made tea, his hands sloshing half of it onto the counter. He paced the small room like a caged animal. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and his restless movements. The sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the floor. The cabin, which had felt confining before, now felt like the only safe place in the world. A small, warm island in a sea of cold and darkness. Finally, he stopped pacing. He stood in the middle of the room, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. "Julian?" I said, my voice still weak. He turned slowly. The firelight danced across his face, illuminating the exhaustion and the fear that still lingered in his eyes. He looked older, more fragile. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "For what?" I asked, confused. "You saved my life, for bringing you here, for the canoe, for all of it. This was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. It was supposed to be simple." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Nothing with me is ever simple, is it?" He finally walked over and sank to the floor in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He still wasn't looking at me, but at my hands, which were clenched tightly in the blanket. "When you went under," he started, his voice cracking. He stopped and swallowed hard. "When I was swimming to you, there was this 1 second where I couldn't see you. Just water. And my entire life, Leo, I've never been that scared. Not even close." My heart, which had finally started to beat at a normal rhythm, began to pound again. This was it. The confession. Not love, maybe, but of something deep and vital that he had never shown me before. "I don't just mean scared of you drowning," he continued, finally lifting his gaze to meet mine. His eyes were dark and intense in the firelight. It was more than that. It was like, if you were gone, the whole world would just go gray. Muted. Like none of it would matter anymore. The air left my lungs again, but this time it wasn't from cold or panic. It was from the weight of his words. A decade of my silent, one-sided adoration, and here he was articulating a feeling so powerful, so raw, it stole my breath away. "I don't know what I'm trying to say," he mumbled, looking away again, back to the safety of the floorboards. "I'm not good at this. At words, you don't have to be," I whispered. I did something I had never dared to do. I reached out from my cocoon of blankets and touched his hand. His skin was warm. His fingers were rough with calluses. He flinched, not away, but as if my touch were an unexpected shock. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over and curled his fingers around mine. The connection was electric. It was a live wire, humming with 10 years of unspoken feelings, with the terror of the day, with the quiet intimacy of the firelit cabin. He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. His expression was one of profound, aching confusion and longing. It was the same longing I saw in my own reflection every morning. "Leo," he breathed, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. It was just my name, but he said it like a question, like a prayer. He leaned in, slow, hesitant, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of our old friendship. His eyes searched mine, asking for permission. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I leaned forward, closing the small distance between us. His lips were soft, tentative. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of discovery, of questioning. It tasted of wood smoke and tea and a deep, soul-shaking relief. It was honest. It was quiet. It was everything I had ever wanted and never thought I could have. He rested his forehead against mine, our lips still brushing. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. A single, perfect tear traced a path through the grime on his face. "I've been so stupid," he whispered. And in that small, warm cabin, surrounded by the vast, dark woods, I finally felt like I could breathe. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I was home. I fell asleep, wrapped in his arms, right there on the floor, in front of the dying fire. It was a sleep deeper and more peaceful than any I had ever known. The shivering had stopped, replaced by a profound warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets or the embers. It was the solid, grounding presence of him, his chest rising and falling against my back, his arm draped possessively over my waist. For the first time, The distance between us was 0. But when I woke, the warmth was gone. The first thing I registered was the cold, a deep, seeping chill that had returned to my bones. The fire was nothing but gray ash. The early morning light, filtering through the dusty window, was pale and weak. The second thing I registered was that I was alone. I sat up, the blankets pooling around me. The space where Julian had been was empty. His scent lingered on the wool, a phantom presence. Anxiety, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering haze of sleep. My stomach twisted into a knot of bees. It was a mistake. The thought was immediate, a brutal, invasive weed. It had all been a mistake, a reaction to trauma, a moment of heightened emotion after a near-death experience. It wasn't real. He didn't mean it. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I looked around the small cabin. His jacket was gone from the hook by the door. His boots were gone. He left. He actually left. The self-recrimination was a tidal wave. I was a fool, an idiot. I had misread everything. I had taken his fear and his relief and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had taken advantage of his vulnerability. He probably woke up this morning filled with regret and disgust. The silence of the cabin was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. My old solitude, the one I had cultivated so carefully, rushed back in. But it was different now. It was tainted. Before, it was just emptiness. Now it was an absence. The shape of him was carved out of the air, a hollow space that ached. I stood there for what felt like an hour, frozen in the center of the room, listening to the frantic monologue in my own head. Each thought was worse than the last. He's walking to his truck. He's driving away. He's never going to speak to me again. Our friendship, the one thing I valued most, was shattered. And it was my fault. Then I heard it. The rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. He hadn't left. He was just outside. The relief was so potent it made my knees weak. But it was immediately followed by a fresh wave of dread. He was outside, avoiding me, putting physical distance between us, building a wall of activity and noise so we wouldn't have to talk about what happened. This was worse than him leaving. This was the long, slow, awkward death of whatever we had. I forced myself to move. I pulled on a dry pair of jeans and a sweater, my fingers clumsy and stiff. Every action felt monumental. I had to face him. I had to know. I had to hear him say it was a mistake so I could begin the excruciating process of putting my walls back up, thicker and higher this time. I opened the cabin door. The morning air was crisp and cold. He was at the woodpile, his back to me. He swung the axe with a kind of violent, furious energy. Each swing was a punctuation mark in the heavy silence. Thud, thud, thud. He was working through something, punishing the wood for his own confusion. He must have heard the door open, but he didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He just kept swinging, the muscles in his back and shoulders coiling and releasing with brutal efficiency. I stood on the porch, hugging myself against the cold, feeling small and exposed. The silence stretched. It was a standoff, a test of wills, and I was terrible at these things. I was an expert at retreat, but something had changed in me. The man who had almost drowned was not quite the same as the man who had gotten into the canoe. I had felt his breath in my lungs. I'd felt his fear. I couldn't go back to being a passive observer. "Julian," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the still morning air. The axe stopped mid-swing. He stood there for a long moment, his back still to me, his shoulders heaving. Then, slowly, he lowered the axe and drove it into the chopping block. He wiped his brow with the back of his forearm before finally turning to face me. His expression was guarded. His jaw was tight. The vulnerability from last night was gone, replaced by a familiar, impenetrable mask. My heart sank. "You're up," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I woke up. I clarified, my own voice trembling slightly. "You were gone. Needed to clear my head," he said, gesturing vaguely at the pile of split wood. The space between us felt like a mile. The carefully chosen, neutral words were daggers. This was it. The recoil. The retreat into politeness. The first step toward becoming strangers again. About last night, I started forcing the words out. "Leo, don't," he cut me off, holding up a hand. He He looked pained. Let's not. And that was all the confirmation I needed. It was a mistake, a moment of madness. My meticulously ordered world, which had been so gloriously shattered, was now just a pile of rubble at my feet. The pain was sharp and breathtaking. It was worse than the cold of the lake. Right? I said, my voice hollow. I nodded, jerky, puppet-like motion. Okay, I get it. It was the situation. I understand. I turned to go back inside, to hide in the wreckage of my own foolish hopes. No, he said, his voice sharp, insistent. No, you don't understand. You don't understand at all. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and looked back at him. He took a few steps toward me, closing some of the distance. His face was a mess of conflict. The mask was cracking. I woke up this morning, he began, his voice low and strained, and you were there, sleeping. And my first thought was, this is right. This is exactly where he's supposed to be. And that scared the hell out of me. Leo, he scrubbed a hand over his face, a gesture of pure frustration. I'm not like you. I don't know how to handle this stuff. Feelings. I spent my whole life building things, fixing things. I know how to deal with concrete and wood and steel. But this is terrifying. He was vulnerable again. Not because he was afraid of losing me, but because he was afraid of having me. The realization was a slow sunrise in my chest. He wasn't pushing me away because he regretted it. He was pushing me away because it was real. I came out here because I didn't know what to do, he confessed, his eyes pleading with me to understand. I'm good at running. I'm good at working until I'm too tired to think. I'm not good at staying. This was the clarifying conversation. The raw, terrifying honesty that could either save us or break us completely. So what you're saying, I said slowly, my heart daring to hope, is that you're scared? Of course I'm scared, he burst out, taking another step closer. We were only a few feet apart now. I've had this feeling for you for years. Buried so deep, I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. I'd see you with your books, so quiet and smart, and I'd feel like a clumsy oaf. I'd see you laughing with someone else, and I'd feel this ugly, possessive thing in my gut. I didn't know what to do with it, so I ignored it. I dated other people. I tried to force it to go away. Every word was a revelation. A key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. He felt it too. All this time, he felt it too. Yesterday, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. When I pulled you from the water, when I breathed for you, it was like all those walls I'd built just turned to dust. All that was left was the truth. I love you, Leo. And I have no idea what I'm doing. The words I love you hung in the cold morning air. They didn't feel like an ending. They felt like a beginning. A terrifying, wonderful, uncharted beginning. I closed the remaining distance between us. I reached out and took his hand. It was rough and calloused and covered in sawdust. It was the strongest, most wonderful hand in the world. Good, I said, my voice steady for the first time that morning. Because I have no idea what I'm doing either. But maybe we can figure it out together. A slow smile spread across his face, a real one, reaching his eyes and erasing the last of the fear. He squeezed my hand. Yeah, he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Yeah, I confirmed. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his solid, warm chest. I could smell the scent of pine and sweat in him. It was the smell of safety, of coming home. I'm not letting go again, he murmured into my hair, his voice a solemn promise. And I believed him. This wasn't a temporary fix or a fleeting moment. This was a foundation, something solid we could build on. He held my hand as we walked back into the cabin, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It was a simple, symbolic gesture, but it was a promise. An anchor, a tangible act of commitment in the quiet wilderness. The drive home was different. The silence in the truck was no longer tense or awkward. It was comfortable, filled with a quiet understanding. He kept reaching over and taking my hand, his thumbs stroking over my knuckles. Every touch was a reassurance, a reaffirmation. Back in the city, back in my apartment, the change was even more profound. My quiet, solitary space was suddenly filled with his presence. He didn't leave. He stayed. He helped me unpack, his large frame moving through my narrow hallways with a new kind of familiarity. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I opened my eyes, and for a half second, the old panic flared. The fear of waking up alone. But it vanished as soon as I saw him. He was in my kitchen, wearing a pair of my sweatpants that were ridiculously short on him, humming softly as he poured 2 mugs of coffee. He saw me standing in the doorway and smiled. That easy, brilliant smile that I had admired from a distance for so long. But now it was for me. It was ours. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and rumbling. He walked over and handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine. This time I didn't flinch. I leaned in and kissed him, a slow, sweet morning kiss that tasted of coffee and a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. His arms slid around my waist, pulling me against him. "I could get used to this," he murmured against my lips. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could too. Life found a new routine, a shared one. It was made of small, domestic intimacies. Making dinner together, bumping hips in my tiny kitchen, his toolbox appearing next to my bookshelf, the sound of his laughter filling the quiet spaces of my apartment. Sleeping in the same bed every night, no anxiety, no fear, just the steady comfort of his breathing beside me. My world was no longer quiet. It was filled with him, and I had never felt more at peace. I look back on the man I was, the quiet observer cataloging life from a safe distance, and I barely recognize him. I was so afraid of the messiness of emotion, of the risk of connection. I thought my solitude was a strength, a form of self-preservation. In reality, I was drowning in the silence, and I didn't even know it. Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption, the chaos that shattered my carefully ordered life. He pulled me from the cold, quiet depths and breathed life back into me, not just with air from his lungs, but with the terrifying, beautiful truth of his love. He didn't just save me from a lake. He saved me from myself. He showed me that the greatest risk isn't loving someone, but never letting yourself be loved at all. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the course of your life? A single event that shattered your old reality and forced you to build a new one? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed our story, please subscribe for more content that explores the moments that truly define us.